Skyrim is one of the biggest games of all time. It has received high acclaim from reviewers and players alike, been re-released so many times that I've lost count, and sold over 60 million copies across all platforms. Not all sales data for games is exact or public, as it's on the publishers or devs to report it, but of all the information that's out there, this makes it the 8th best-selling game of all time. And what's most impressive about that is that it's one of only 2 games in the top 10 that's single-player only. Since its release, it has been a force to be reckoned with and has changed the gaming landscape forever. Throughout the years, it's inspired countless artists, memers, video essayists, game developers, and of course modders, all of whom have kept the game alive in various ways. And to this day, it still has a massive player base, averaging around 20,000 concurrent players across its Steam versions alone. It is beloved in a way few games ever are, and I often find myself wondering, why? The answer I expect a lot of you will have to this question is simply that it's a great game. And okay, look, I'm not going to claim that everything about Skyrim is terrible. It's not, but there's a lot in it that's really not great. What makes this notable is that some of the stuff that I would say are the worst aspects of the game are also arguably some of the most important. For instance, the combat. It is one of the main pillars of the title, and it's kind of a mess. Melee feels floaty and unresponsive, making it so landing a hit doesn't even feel satisfying. And as enemy AI is pretty bare bones, fights largely boil down to just spamming the attack button in the hopes you'll outdamage whatever you're going against. You may occasionally need to block or take a few steps back to avoid a hit, but even then it still ends up being pretty mindless, and can be further trivialized by making or buying a lot of health potions. Magic also feels unsatisfying due to scaling issues, and can be incredibly frustrating because of how easy it is to accidentally do damage to allies or just any person hanging around. The latter can be especially annoying, as in some instances it leads to people attacking you. Like when I was doing the vampire quest near Morthal, I had Thonir join me, and whenever I would use Bane of the Undead, the area of effect would hit him too, giving me a bounty and causing him to go after me as if there wasn't a master vampire right in front of us. All in all, while your attacks may get stronger and your defense is more effective, you're never really challenged to engage with the combat any differently by the end than you are at the beginning, creating a flat experience. Another rough spot with the game can be seen with the role-playing itself. While you do have tons of choices in terms of what quests you engage with, more often than not, there aren't all that many interesting choices once you've started a quest line. And in the instances where you are given a choice, it often ends up lacking nuance and suitable options. One of the first quests players will likely come across is a prime example of this. Upon reaching Riverwood, you come across Sven and Faendal, 2 inhabitants of the village who are in love with the same woman, Camilla. Whichever one you talk to first will ask you to deliver a fake letter to Camilla filled with rude and heinous things, and then tell her it was sent from the other. From there, you can give her the letter and either lie or tell the truth about who wrote it, or you can show it to the suitor you haven't talked to yet, who will then give you a fake letter of his own to give to Camilla and also tell you to say it was from the other. Now, once you have both letters, you have to make a choice between who you want to sell out, Sven or Faendal, and this sucks. The quest makes it clear that both these guys are scumbags, but once you reach the point of figuring that out, there is no way to tell Camilla about it. So you either have to pick a side and let her continue to spend time with someone that's manipulating her, or you just do nothing, neither of which feels like a satisfying end if you are trying to play as a moral character. And these kinds of decisions are pretty commonplace. More often than not, you are extremely limited in the responses you can have to any given situation, and the options you are posed with often don't account for information you've uncovered, all of which makes it hard to develop any sort of personality for your character. Most of the time, you have to pick between 2 bad choices. These 2 aspects of the game design feel especially noteworthy because Skyrim is an action role-playing game, yet its action and role-playing are both fairly lackluster. I know some people will point out that Skyrim is a 13-year-old game, so it obviously is going to be rough around the edges in some ways, and yeah, sure, that is true to a degree, but these specific issues don't really have much to do with limitations in tech or design knowledge. There are plenty of titles from that era that did these elements much better, and a bunch of them were published by Bethesda. For example, Dishonored dropped just a year after Skyrim, and it provided exciting and satisfying first-person melee combat that allowed for tons of player expression due to its movement options and Corvo's supernatural abilities. Even a few years before that, Dark Messiah of Might and Magic had an incredible combat system that rewarded creativity and observation of the environment while also having solid and varied swordplay. As for the role-playing side of things, Fallout Fallout New Vegas released in 2010 and has long been praised as one of the most well-written, interesting, and robust role-playing experiences of all time. The point is, they had the ability to create deeper and more fulfilling combat and role-playing systems. They just chose not to. My list of issues with the game goes on and on, ranging from the overly simplistic puzzles, to the level scaling, to the tedium of travel, to the annoying encumbrance system, and it all adds up to an experience that's easy to look back on as one defined by missed opportunity. Now, despite all of my criticisms, Skyrim became Skyrim. A title that will forever be seen as one of the most important games ever, that people will keep coming back to regardless of how much time has passed. That means something more to those who love it than most games could ever dream of. It doesn't matter that I have issues with it, because it's reached people in a way that few titles ever have or will. And again, that brings me back to the question of, why Skyrim? Despite how it may seem, I'm not trying to be a hater for the sake of being a hater. This isn't meant to be me arguing that game people love bad. I don't want to try to prove to you that Skyrim never should have reached the heights it did, or that you didn't even really like it actually. I just have long felt a disconnect with the game, and genuinely want to understand how Skyrim, a title with so many shortcomings and aspects working against it, succeeded in spite of them. So for the past few months, I've immersed myself in all things to do with the game, reading interviews, researching the release, and replaying it, and I see things a lot clearer now. Of course, it's not the sort of thing that can be boiled down to a single answer. It's a confluence of factors, some circumstantial and some intentional, that enabled Skyrim to become the behemoth it is. And I think it all begins with the audience Bethesda was aiming to capture. Most games out there have a wide range of types of fans, but I've noticed this is especially true with Skyrim. Obviously, there are plenty of longtime fantasy nerds who fell in love with it, as well as RPG lovers, but it also grabbed the attention of a much more casual audience. This is anecdotal, but over the years, I've had many conversations with people who lean on the normie side of the spectrum, where we get on the topic of video games, and I end up asking what their top 3 favorites are. And the majority of the time, their answers have been along the lines of Call of Duty, FIFA, and Skyrim. There are so many people who have played Skyrim that you wouldn't have expected to play Skyrim, that don't play anything else remotely similar to Skyrim. Yet, despite it being a single-player fantasy game, it appealed to these kinds of players anyway. One major reason for this had less to do with the game itself and more to do with the cultural landscape of 2011, primarily how fantasy was moving into the mainstream. Fantasy is an interesting genre in that it feels niche in a lot of ways, and for a while it was, but over the past 20 years or so, it has become no longer just for the nerds. One of the biggest contributors to this shift was the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which released in the early 2000s and achieved levels of success that no one could have ever expected, creating a demand for more stories that felt like it. This gave fantasy games a much larger target demographic to aim towards, helping many titles in that space become even more relevant. Now, the success of Lord of the Rings definitely helped Skyrim in some ways, but a different fantasy series played a much more impactful role in its success. That, of course, being Game of Thrones. The show premiered in April of 2011 and was an immediate success. There were nearly 10 million average viewers per episode, not including the many more people who pirated it, and that first season laid the foundation for the cultural phenomenon it would eventually become. Its grounded story, filled with multifaceted and relatable characters, helped give it a broad appeal even with all of its fantastical elements, getting even more people who had never been interested in the genre to not only watch the show, but to also buy the books. And once folks caught up to whatever was out at the time, many wanted to keep experiencing stuff like Game of Thrones. Just 7 months after the pilot aired, Skyrim released, a game that takes place in a snow-covered region largely inhabited by people who are seeking independence from the rulers to the south that heavily features a civil war and dragons. Obviously, the game wasn't inspired by the success of the show, as all of these aspects were developed long before it premiered, but some of them were definitely inspired by the books, with Todd Howard saying, "People in our studio liked it, and it seeped in a bit to what we were doing." What's more interesting is that apparently before Skyrim was in development, George R. R. Martin's team reached out to Bethesda to pitch a game set in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, but Bethesda decided they'd rather make a game in their own world, which does make the similarities between the two feel a little funny in hindsight. To be clear, the two properties have tons of differences, and also a lot of the things they have in common are popular fantasy tropes and ideas from real-world histories and mythologies. So while some influence from A Song of Ice and Fire clearly exists, it'd be unfair to say Bethesda just copied George R. R. Martin's homework. Regardless, the parallels between the two created a synergy that benefited both properties. They acted as a sort of funnel to the other, and given that Game of Thrones was such a massive gateway into fantasy for so many new people, I think this was especially beneficial for Skyrim. Whenever someone, whether it be a longtime fantasy fan or a person newer to the genre, wanted to play or experience something that felt similar to Game of Thrones, Skyrim was the obvious choice, as no other game at the time came anywhere close to matching the show's scope and tone until The Witcher 3 came out in 2015. Skyrim was the closest thing there was to a Game of Thrones game, and that's kind of wild as there actually was a Game of Thrones game, and it was something. While this synergy was largely coincidental, Bethesda did seemingly capitalize on it with their marketing, most notably with the live-action trailer that came out a few weeks before the game did. It is very Game of Thrones coded. Honestly, it could have easily been mistaken for a Season 2 teaser trailer. When asked about the similarities, Pete Hines, Bethesda's former VP of Marketing and Communications, said, "If people say that looks like Game of Thrones, we're in the right place in terms of mood and vibe and tone. If that's the impression we're leaving, that's a good thing, as opposed to this must be for some new video game." By airing a trailer that evoked a similar feel to the show, it signaled to anyone who had watched Game of Thrones, if you like that kind of storytelling, you'll like this as well. Now, Skyrim's success with more casual gamers can't solely be attributed to the Game of Thrones effect. It certainly helped, as fantasy had never been more in demand than it was during the show's run, but there's way more to it than that. Not to mention, Bethesda wasn't just looking to bring in fans of Game of Thrones, they wanted to go well beyond. And in their effort to do that, they ran one of the most effective marketing campaigns of all time. Even with the popularity of the genre growing, Bethesda still faced the challenge of figuring out how to market a high fantasy game to a mainstream audience. In a talk that a few members of Skyrim's marketing team gave at the Game Marketing Summit in 2012, they discussed how they didn't want to apologize for what the game was, but did want to find a way to present it that felt more approachable. To do this, instead of featuring the wide range of mechanics in the game, they leaned more into Skyrim's cinematic elements. This is evident with the live action trailer, but it also can be seen with the game's official trailer. There's narration about a coming threat, cuts between an intricately carved wall that seemingly contains some sort of prophecy, a person running, and something that seems to be chasing them, and it culminates with a confrontation between a dragon and the game's hero. It then pulls out and shows off many of the locations across the world, as well as the various ways you can fight against the threats you'll face. After an action-packed montage, it cuts back to the hero who defeats the dragon and absorbs its power, an experience you'd expect to be exceedingly rare, but then the camera pushes out again, showing a stunning landscape with another dragon casually perched on some old ruins. Not only does this provide viewers with an easy little story to follow and be intrigued by, but it also shows off how much bigger the world is than this single moment. It promises a game with countless epic encounters, with a new dragon around every corner, an experience that is bigger than you can imagine. The cinematic approach allowed them to portray the fantastical elements of the world in-game in a way that didn't feel like nerd shit, but for the nerds watching, they could easily see all of the nerd shit within it, making it effective for both audiences. One issue with presenting a limited view of a game in this way is that buyers may feel lied to when they get their hands on it and it doesn't end up playing anything like they thought it would, but Skyrim largely avoided this. Where a lot of cinematic trailers at the time didn't really resemble the gameplay or even visuals of the title in the slightest, Skyrim's was made in-engine, so what people saw largely was what they ended up getting. Also, even though the majority of the game is filled with slower moments, there are still plenty of these epic encounters, and as so many of them are unscripted, they're always exciting to come across. Furthermore, the slow moments that the game is kind of defined by help accentuate the ones that aren't. The downtime is a necessary part of making them feel special, it just doesn't make for the best advertising. The trailer presents a version of Skyrim many players might think they want, one filled with constant action and adventure, and then the game provided them with one that most would actually want, one still with tons of action and adventure, but also enough time to breathe in between so it never becomes exhausting. This same philosophy was also utilized by the marketing team in regards to how they rolled out information. Instead of constantly promoting the game, they valued restraint, aiming to keep information low in the hopes that, in the words of Aaron Losey, Bethesda's current VP of Global Marketing and Communications, they would keep people hungry for more content. The campaign started on December 11th, 2010 with the announcement trailer, and was followed by the official trailer a few months later, but after that they scaled back a fair bit to not oversaturate their messaging. They showed off a few demos at events, but for a good while there wasn't a ton of information about the game beyond the main trailers. This strategy offered tons of room for speculation and intrigue, causing a lot of conversations about the game to be fan-driven as opposed to marketing-driven. And it worked. People talked about it regularly and even started memeing about aspects of the game well before it released. This kind of strategy has become pretty popular with established studios, as once a series has found success, there will likely be a base of fans that can be relied on to generate hype for whatever is next. By not revealing too much, it allows players to imagine all the possibilities of how it might be to play and avoids running the risk of fans becoming worn out from hearing about it too much. This is what FromSoft and Bandai Namco did with Elden Ring, it's what Nintendo did with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and it's what Rockstar is currently doing with GTA 6. After the success of Oblivion as well as Fallout 3, Bethesda was more popular than ever, and so the anticipation for what they did next was high. By only giving sparse updates, they were able to stoke the anticipation, always leaving people wanting more, and then right before release ramped things up dramatically. It was in this final push that they released a live action trailer as well as a bunch of informational ones aimed at more dedicated fans, providing material for folks belonging to all the various demographics they were targeting, and during that span it was hard for Skyrim not to be on the brain. Along with their successful ads, they also threw a lot of stuff at the wall to see what might stir up conversation. The wildest of which being an offer they issued 9 months before the game came out, where anyone who had a kid on Skyrim's release date and named them Dovahkiin would get free Bethesda games for the rest of their life, which frankly was a bad deal then and is a worse deal now. But of course, someone did it. Bethesda's marketing campaign paid off massively, with Skyrim selling 10 million copies in its first month, surpassing Oblivion's lifetime sales. And the team racked up all sorts of marketing awards as well. It helped expose the game to a new audience and drew them in enough to actually buy it, while also still catering to their longtime fans. Now, no matter how timely or well marketed a title is, if the game itself is terrible, it will have a short lifespan. So based on what I said about its major mechanics before, you'd think Skyrim would have suffered that same fate, especially because those complaints aren't all that unique. People have been bringing them up since it came out, and I've even seen plenty of diehard fans admit that many of them are shortcomings. But despite that, Skyrim has never stopped thriving. People love playing it, even though it has problems. After starting a new playthrough of the game and approaching it with as open of a mind as possible, in my estimations at least, there are two main reasons for this. The first being that most of the ways in which Skyrim is quote-unquote bad were designed that way in order to be approachable to the wide audience they had just captured. There's this talk I think about a lot from Derek Yu, the designer of the Spelunky series, where he discusses the idea of spiky design versus soft design. Essentially, spiky design is stuff that causes friction for the player, that sometimes feels unintuitive, but gets them in a state of focus and at its best creates this sense that they are in a world that could exist without them. Where soft design is stuff that prioritizes player comfort, always aiming to avoid negative emotions in regards to interactivity so that players have a smooth experience. All games contain some amount of both types of design, but generally lean one way or the other. Skyrim has a ton of soft design. Many of its mechanics feel frictionless. That's not to say there are never obstacles that slow the player down or even halt their progress, but for the most part, all of its major systems are easy to engage with and can be engaged with regardless of the type of character you've made. So even though I find the combat to be shallow and boring, the fact that it isn't skill-based means pretty much any player can succeed in fights as long as they have potions on hand and keep upgrading their perks and gear. It's not the most engaging, but it also doesn't box many players out of progressing. With the role-playing, as many choices boil down to simple binaries with somewhat predictable outcomes, it lessens the risk of decision fatigue, and also players don't have to worry nearly as much on how a choice might impact them moving forward. In general, there isn't much the player can get locked out of based on their choices. With the exception of the Civil War questline, doing something for one faction won't stop you from doing something for another, so there rarely are meaningful consequences to actions, which is appealing to those who worry about missing things and messing up their game. Ultimately, a lot of design in Skyrim seems to be centered around the player always moving forward and progressing in one way or another. Like, this is why it has level scaling. It makes it so that in most cases, if the player finds a quest they want to do, they can do it right away. For those who just want to do the main quest, that's an option, and for those who want to do whatever random tasks they stumble across, that is too. And the softness of Skyrim doesn't stop there. It can be seen with the simplicity of the puzzles and the ability to engage with any skills and the leveling system in general. In a lot of ways, Skyrim doesn't want to get in the player's way. It wants to get them through the door in the hopes that they'll stay a while. And I think this was more than enough for a large portion of the player base, especially the more casual gamers Skyrim was able to bring in. A lot of them just wanted something mildly engaging that they could sink a lot of hours into over a long period of time, and Skyrim provided just that. It's a rare single-player game that can compete with multiplayer titles in terms of potential worthwhile playtime. I still believe that Skyrim would have been a much better game if its combat and role-playing asked for more from players, but I also think far more people would have bounced off of it if that were the case. With all that said, Skyrim's long-term appeal is deeper than it being designed in a way that is approachable to everyone. While it certainly leans pretty heavily on the side of soft design, it does have a fair bit of spiky design as well, a lot of which helps accentuate my favorite bits of the game. For instance, it does a lot of stuff that cultivates a powerful sense of place. Every object in the game is a physical thing that can be interacted with. They can be picked up and moved around, which doesn't really serve much of a purpose, but the interactivity feels nice regardless. Presenting items in this way often makes it slower to collect them, as they aren't just bundled up in a glowing light that you know will be worthwhile to grab. Instead, you need to sift through things, picking them up one by one, which in some cases, like when there are a dozen gold pieces on a table, can feel excessive, but it also creates an almost tactile sense to the things you're engaging with. You have to spot what you might need and decide what's actually useful and what will just waste space in your inventory. Honestly, the encumbrance system in general pushes you to always think about the items you're carrying. I do have issues with how it's incorporated, but at the very least it prompts some level of thoughtfulness about what you're grabbing. I think it could be argued that the game's reliance on menuing also adds to this feeling, as even with hotkeys there are so many items and abilities you'll likely cycle between that you'll never cover them all. So whether it be the favorites menu or the main menu, you'll be pausing the action regularly and scrolling through everything you have, as there is no real way to sort stuff to get to the things you want to use, in theory reminding you about all the other things you have at your disposal. While these breaks in action can be annoying, they also lead to some incredible moments where you notice something far more useful in your inventory than what you were looking for that helps you overcome a challenge. Furthermore, even though the game scales to your level, there are some enemies placed around the world with set levels and others who start at a much higher level than the Dragonborn before they start scaling. This leads to some big difficulty spikes where you need to figure out how to deal with an enemy that you don't have a good chance of defeating by typical means. On this playthrough, I was given a quest from the companions to take out some vampires, and it all felt like an appropriate challenge until just before the end, where a master vampire blocked my way. As I was far under his level and had no shot of out damaging him, I instead kited him over to a ledge, charmed him so he wouldn't be hostile, lined things up as best as I could, and then somewhat messily knocked him off. And it felt so good to do. Admittedly, more often than not, these spikes will probably push players to just run away, but they can also spur creative thinking, which makes them valuable. The dragon attacks are another example of this. When they pop up, your travels become far more treacherous, and it can lead to some interesting interactions, like when a blood dragon attacked me as I was running by a giant and the two of them started fighting, so I stood from a distance doing what I could to support my new giant friend. This all adds a layer of excitement to what can often be just a dull walk. Honestly, even the fact that the game doesn't have interesting movement mechanics means your focus will mostly be on just looking around, helping you get a better lay of the land and appreciate the beauty of the place you're in. I'm not saying all of these things are perfectly done. I'm not even saying that Bethesda incorporated every single one of them with this exact result in mind, but I do think their friction has an effect, and for the most part that effect makes players consider the space they are in and the various things that are in it in a way a lot of games don't. Skyrim's major mechanics are soft, making it massively approachable, but many of its minor ones are spiky, creating a thorough connection between the player and the world without running the risk of them getting stuck. This, mixed with Skyrim's massive scope, creates a unique kind of immersion, one that is more concerned with the small moments than the big ones. But as there are so many small moments to be had, it all adds up to something more substantial. There are so many interactions to experience. You can explore almost any place you see. You can grab a fish from a line. You can pick up a mug from a table. You can find ants crawling on tree stumps. You can drop something on the ground and it will still be there 20 hours later. There are roaring rivers, lush forests, and northern lights that paint the night sky. Characters go about their lives regardless of if you are there and have conversations with each other about insignificant things. And every moment is accompanied by impeccable sound design and an all-timer soundtrack. Frankly, a lot of this stuff doesn't really matter in terms of what could be considered the core of the game. They aren't part of the gameplay loop, and most don't even serve a functional purpose, but they are still there and can be encountered everywhere. Even though the combat and role-playing don't feel like they have much weight to them, the world itself does. It feels alive. and while the game does frequently show its seams and break the powerful sense of immersion it builds so well, it never takes long to slip back into it by coming across something new. In the documentary, You're Finally Awake, 9 developers recount the making of Skyrim, there's a quote from Dennis Mahiones, one of the game's character artists, that I keep coming back to, which is, "It's not that we did any one thing first or any one thing better, it's that we did it all for the first time." The thing is, it's not just that they did it all for the first time, it's also that no other game has really done it all again since, at least not to the same degree. And this is the other major reason I think Skyrim continues to be so popular to this day. No other game feels like it. Sure, plenty of open world titles have incorporated ideas from Skyrim, but the vast majority of them have taken far more influence from the likes of Assassin's Creed and Grand Theft Auto. Most are action focused, have third-person perspectives, and offer far less unnecessary interactivity. This makes leaner games that are often more fun to play on a moment-to-moment basis, but they lack the slow burn that makes Skyrim Skyrim. What I've come to realize through replaying Skyrim and talking to others about it is that for a lot of people, the reason they keep coming back isn't because they want to defeat Alduin or become the head of the Thieves Guild. It's not because they care about maxing out their armor or getting the most powerful spells. It's that they just want to recapture the wonder of being part of a fantastical world that feels realized in a unique way, that isn't always concerned with every aspect adding to the gameplay. They might want to experience this for just 1 hour, or they might want to for 100, but ultimately it is less about the experience of playing through the game than it is about playing in it. For these reasons and more, Skyrim has created a loyal following. By appealing to a massive audience but delivering an experience that feels deliberate in significant ways, they hooked millions of people. And many of those people are willing to buy multiple versions of the game so that they can keep stepping back into an experience only it really offers. Many also have the desire to regularly mod it in order to get a fresh experience of what they first fell in love with. Honestly, Skyrim is kind of the perfect game to be modded because it has so many systems with the potential of being far more interesting than they currently are. And Bethesda deserves a ton of credit for recognizing that their fans would want to mod the game and providing tools to help them do it more easily. Skyrim rides an interesting line of being for everyone and for no one. I can't say examining it in this way has made me fall in love with it. I do still find myself wishing it was a much better game, or at least more suited for my tastes. But also, I think there is a ton of value in it being an entry point to video games, or at least these kinds of video games, for so many people. Skyrim came out at a perfect time to reach a new audience, and Bethesda did a stellar job in grasping that audience and designing a game that wouldn't push them away, while also putting in enough jagged edges to make things feel meaningful. The world is worth revisiting because in ways it feels like a real place. A place you'd be lucky to see with your own 2 eyes. A place that begs the question, why not Skyrim? If you also hate getting over-encumbered, you should check out this video's sponsor, Bellroy. Bellroy makes tons of awesome products that are focused on keeping you organized and looking stylish. I use Bellroy stuff all the time. The sling has become a part of my everyday carry, as well as this wallet, which somehow is able to hold all of my cards without being a bulky mess. For bigger trips, I have a backpack with more secret pockets than you can imagine, and a tech kit that is perfect for transporting small electronics like a Switch. In general, Bellroy provides functional yet sleek ways to carry your stuff, and they do a lot to minimize the environmental impacts of making physical things by using sustainable materials like Ecotan leather and recycled nylon. Bellroy has become my go-to place to buy stuff like this. I've shopped from them in the past and will again. So yeah, if you're like me and love quality bags and cool little accessories, click the link in the description to get 10% off anything at Bellroy.com. Whatever it is, I'd be willing to bet that it will help you in one way or another. So yeah, thanks to Bellroy for sponsoring this video. For all of you still here, hi. I'd like to thank my patrons for making this channel possible. It goes further than you know. I hope you all have a great day and or night, and I will see you in the next one.